Okay, everybody, we have reached the bottom of the hour, so let's get started with today's LTEN webinar, How to Use Technology and Data to Improve Training Outcomes, sponsored by ClearPoint. My name is Tim Sosby. I'm Editorial Director for LTEN, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today and to serve as the host of our webinar. I'm going to start with some housekeeping items here, including most importantly how you can submit questions for our speakers. We are planning a 60-minute session for you today. You'll notice your phones are on mute, so I'm going to urge you to ask any questions you might have using the questions module on the right side of your screen. You can just type in any questions or comments and hit the submit button. We'll receive those, queue them up, ask them at the appropriate time throughout today's webinar or in the Q&A session at the end of the program. I would like to urge you to submit any questions or comments while they're fresh in your mind as they occur throughout today's program, and we will stop and try to take questions again as they occur and while they're fresh in your mind. So please do let us hear from you throughout today's program. I also wanted to point out on that control panel, there's a handouts button. If you notice the handouts button, you can open up that section, and there's several items in there, including a copy of today's presentation slides. You can download any of those materials throughout today's webinar. Just select the title, hit the download button, it will let you place it anywhere you like on your computer. In addition to today's slide, there's also some information on our upcoming conference and some information on LTEN we'd be happy to share with you as well. So again, feel free to use those, and if I can help you with anything there, just let me know. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be archived for future reference. We're going to send you all a note in about 1 hour after today's program connecting you to that recording. It will also be archived in the webinar archives on the l-10.org website. And speaking of after the program, as you leave today's webinar, a short follow-up survey is going to pop up on a browser window, a separate browser window. Please take a moment, find that survey, and just quickly share your thoughts with us on today's webinar. We produce these for you, so of course your feedback is always important. There will also be a link to that survey in the follow-up email we send you about 1 hour after today's program ends. And finally, I've put my email address here on the screen, and we'll share it again later. If I can help you throughout these webinars before, during, or after, never hesitate to reach out. Oh, and one more thing, I also wanted to make sure I point out the hashtag here. We've created a hashtag for Twitter today around today's program. So if you'd like to tweet anything you hear, we would love to have you include that hashtag so we can keep track of the conversation and maybe contribute to it as well and share it and whatnot. So we would urge you to use Twitter and use that hashtag throughout today's program. Okay, with all of that said, let me tell you about our speakers today, Dave Noonan and Kent Melrose. Kent is, oops, I'm sorry, I went too far. Kent is the Vice President of Global Strategy and Products for ClearPoint Learning. Kent joined ClearPoint in April of 2014, initially serving as VP of Products and Alliance, responsible for managing existing partnerships and implementing a global product strategy. In addition to building ClearPoint's product strategy, he was chartered with initiating development efforts on key offerings, and he's also built a product management and services organization to support commercial implementation of these offerings. Joining Kent today is Dave Noonan. Dave is Director of Client Strategies for ClearPoint Learning. Dave's perspective on learning and development has been shaped by more than 15 years of experience in various pharmaceutical sales and sales leadership roles before joining ClearPoint in December 2015. He partners with key life science customers on the development of creative learning programs that help build better sales teams. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn things over to Kent to take it away. Kent, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate you having us for this topic in particular because we love talking about using technology and data to improve training outcomes, both internally and with our customers. It's timely. It's something that we believe needs a little bit of practical application in the field, and no reason not to get everyone involved in the discussion we find ourselves having within the ClearPoint walls. So much is made of leveraging technology to generate meaningful data in those training journeys. I'm really fortunate to have my colleague Dave Noonan here, who has been through many of those training journeys and has experienced some of the challenges that maybe not having the right technologies can provide, and he'll talk a little bit about his experience and the aspirations that he certainly has had to leverage training data to make meaningful business decisions and ideally in analytic situations. You know, I think about what we do, which is presenting holistic training solutions to our partners, and one particular customer comes to mind at a top 5 global pharma company, and Similarly, he asked us to present a complete training solution for a particular initiative. They included content. They included a technology to deliver that content. And as we got through that overall concept, we started to get questions, and he was very interested in data. Does everything get tracked? Amount of time in the assets, completions? Are you using the Tin Can API so you can get the most data possible from an e-learning module? Are you generating points for leaderboards? Everything was about data, and of course our response was absolutely, all of those things are possible. My follow-up question to this gentleman was, so what are you planning to do with that data? And there was silence. He just didn't know. He wanted to make sure that he had it all, but there was no practical use for it. And the idea around using technology and data to improve training outcomes, it can't be aspirational, it has to be practical. And so technology is definitely not the solution when you're looking for critical tools to pull in data. It is part of the overarching solution, and we have to think about how to apply that technology appropriately. So today we're going to try to bring some of those key concepts in, and we'll talk about 3 critical components to using technology and data to improve training outcomes. The first is making sure you have the right technology or technologies for particular parts of your initiative. Second is knowing the audience for whom you're actually collecting the data. These are things that need to then intersect and can bring you to the third concept of knowing why you're collecting data and what the desired outcomes are. And what we'll do then is jump into applying these to kind of a composite real-world situation, something that looks a lot like a training journey that we've developed, but bringing in concepts that might touch on all pieces that you could then really think through when and how you want to use technology to collect data. So if we start thinking about that first bullet point, having the right technology or technologies, it's really going to challenge everyone to think about this differently. We've been in this space with Tim and the LTEN audience, really, I think, lamenting the difficulties that are presented by app proliferation and the fact that learners, reps out in the field are touching so many different technologies to get through a training journey. And we're not going to go into that really as much today in terms of the benefits of consolidation. We'll touch on it. But really, if you're selecting technologies that create this proliferation, how are you using them in terms of collecting data? With respect to measurement, it's critical that the technologies being used are considered in the following light. So first, with training apps, learning management systems, other training delivery platforms, do you have the ability to get those standard completions? Can they be timestamped, tracked? Are there other capabilities like measuring the amount of time spent in an e-learning module, for example? For assessment apps on the second level, can you collect question level data for each user? This is something I think is often overlooked and really critical when you start to try to get into a deep dive understanding of what's going on and frankly create remediation opportunities. The third concept is for technology, is the data available? You go out and buy a technology, people will say, we can collect so much data about what the user is doing through our app. Make sure the next question you ask is, how available is it? And is it available through user access reporting, or is that something that has to be delivered to you through a service engagement? Because you can't get to the data in real time, you aren't necessarily going to have the opportunity to impact training outcomes the way we're going to outline. So is that data then available to an end user, but is it also available in real time or near real time? And then the last thing I'd say, and this is, going back to the original concept, think about then if it is possible to eliminate some of the technologies, because it's really important that you're getting that entire data set for each part of a training journey when you're trying to understand what's going on with a learner or group of learners. Oh, one too far. So then we move on to that second bullet point, knowing the audience, and this will really get into the third bullet point of the why. We're going to dive into this in a lot more detail, so be brief here. Who is it that has a vested interest in the outcomes of the training experience? Obviously, learners, they want to know they're completing items, they want to know they're having success. There's no question they want to see some data that at least articulates and visualizes for them what they're doing and how they're doing. But think about is the learning and development department or sales training and sales operations or leadership, are they looking critically at the training outcomes, and are they looking at different data or desired looking at different data to get a better sense of what's going on with their learner population? So make sure you consider who the audience is, why you're collecting data for that audience, and what the outcomes mean to each of those individuals, because it will dictate how you leverage technology to measure different pieces. So we're going to get right into an interactive piece of the program here, Tim. Let's get to our first poll, and I want to see if this initial hypothesis holds water with the rest of the audience. So which technologies do you want to produce data on your reps' activities? And really what we mean here is not just throughout a training journey, but when you get into their everyday life. And the first option is the learning management system. We have some acronyms here, so we'll spell them out. CRM, customer relationship management. When we say CLM, maybe a closed-loop marketing application. DVA, a digital visual aid. Or there are certainly more and more digital coaching apps that are available on mobile technologies. And Dave, I think you've used some of these, so as we wait for people to respond, tell me where you had seen, maybe in your experience, some data being harvested to give you insight as to what your learners were doing.
Yeah, thank you, Kent. I would say my greatest experience came from the LMS side of things, looking at completion status primarily, as well as potentially some score-related metrics. A little bit on the CRM side there in terms of activity, if you will, relative to interacting with customers and things like that. But that's a little less on the training side. And more recently, more on the coaching app side and trying to provide feedback to myself as a district manager, and when I was in a representative role around the process of being coached relative to skill development, competency development, and the like. So I can see the application across the board, but for me, LMS and coaching app probably the top two real roles for me.
And how are we doing on responses? Curious to see if the data reflects Dave's experience in industry.
Well, thanks, Kent. I'm going to share the results in a few moments here. I'm going to ask everyone to finish wrapping up their votes here. Kent, while they're doing that, we have a question coming in from Hannah in the audience. It's a good question for this point of time as well. What's the best way to integrate, what's the best way to integrate technology if the client or learner is a little scared or intimidated by technology?
That is a good question for now, because I don't really think we will be touching on that in this particular presentation. This is going to be more sort of practical uses of technology at each point in the learning journey. There's not a great answer for that. We certainly experience that with our stakeholders where, you have different, let's say, levels of digital native versus digital immigrant within the workforce. I think in our experience, the best thing you can do is find a small opportunity to deploy a relatively simple technology and get a quick win. And that's a long-winded way of saying find not necessarily an 18-month training journey, or I wouldn't even necessarily start with a 3-month maybe new hire training program, but something as simple as leveraging the conversion of a print material to a PDF with an accompanying assessment in an audience that may not necessarily have comfort with it, just to show that you can take these activities and refine them quickly. Something that I'm sure many people are doing, but the takeaway there is pick something small, do it quickly, and definitely handle objections just like the reps would out in the field.
Excellent. Great answer. Thank you very much. And great question, Hannah. Thank you. Folks, again, freel free to send in any questions along the way. Let me go ahead and close off the poll at this point. Everybody, thanks for sharing. And let's look at the results. And Dave, I'm happy to say you were on track.
I was sweating a little, Tim. I'm not going to lie.
But nice to see. I mean, I think the hypothesis of more and more use of digital coaching apps is being represented there as well, and I think pretty reflective of our understanding. But each category has some response, and I think that indicates that you can pull data from many places. And so it's going to lead well into, Tim, if we get back into the deck, our next concepts. If you think about each point in a training journey, what are the things that we want to be doing? So we're going to start into a case study. In this particular case study, as I said, I mean, it's pretty similar to a training scenario that we deployed. We might pull some composite concepts in from overarching things that we've done throughout a few different ones. But I think the key piece here is, if we all think about our experience, nothing looks that different. Maybe in this visualization, maybe slightly different, the color's different, but then you might actually whiteboard in your organization when you're developing and deploying a training journey for a product launch. The phases are similar. You might call pre-launch home study. You might call the launch event a meeting. and the post-launch we can refer to as, pull-through scenarios. But for the most part, these phases are similar. And I would say that collecting data within the context of these phases has also been largely similar in the recent past. So it's been almost entirely driven by completions and the idea of getting completions to know that you're checking the box and people are getting through the components of that journey. So, for example, if you think about the pre-launch and the foundational learning modules, we talked about the LMS, and Dave has experience getting data out of the LMS. You want to know that someone has completed e-learning modules 1 through 3, ebooks 5 through 7, and you're going to get completion data through an LMS. Maybe in that launch scenario, final certification increasingly done in a digital environment, maybe as a bolt-on to another system or a customized application. Similarly, though, it's binary. There's a pass-fail criteria that is usually beholden to, and that's what we're looking at. Post-launch, yeah, maybe a little bit more variation, frankly, because I think all of you would admit when we think about pull-through activities, often the first to get cut. But for the most part, I think it's safe to say that if you look out at the world, maybe this question of the day is actually producing some data. It's the type of scenario where, you can get a little bit more in analytics, but we're not used to that. Coaching is what's going to get the activities that we can do through a completion scenario, manager attestation and the like. So I'm going to challenge everyone on this call to start thinking about the parts of this journey. Each one of these tactics, each one of these pieces within the phase has a data-rich opportunity that if you leverage the right technology or technologies, can measure a variety of activities that bring voluminous data for you to look at and understand the scenario that you're in with any particular learner or set of learners. So if we jump into the virtual classroom training situation, again, I would say the burden in the past has been around completions. Did you attend? Did you not attend? But as you start to work through opportunities to couple technologies or the right technologies with a virtual classroom training, all of a sudden the door's open. Think about a pre and post assessment, maybe a 3 to 5 question quiz, certainly multiple choice true false. Before that VCT, that gives you a sense for where people start with the knowledge area that's the topic of the day, and then maybe a post assessment. And look at the delta and understand, frankly, did that classroom training work or did it not? Attendance is something I think is similar to completions, but the way to capture attendance might vary. Maybe with an LMS or an LMS integration, you have the ability to do automated e-rostering. You may have the ability to do an instructor attestation so that people know that an instructor can look and see that the person represented themselves appropriately. Start to look at engagement. Are people, and this is where if you think about a technology like Adobe Connect, are they answering polls? You should be able to generate reports out of the right technologies in the back for poll questions by user, understanding which topics are harvesting the most responses, both positively and negative. And that can give you some participation information as well. So all of a sudden, whereas the burden, I'd say reactively, of a virtual classroom training and making sure that someone simply attended is one data point, you now can look at generating 12 to 15 data points that can specifically tell you how effective that particular approach to training was. Same type of thing happens within a launch scenario. So we talked about live workshops. We certainly, think about live workshops as people come into the classroom. We see that they're there. There's a speaker at the front of the room. How much opportunity is there for data? Well, this gets into, definitely the intersection of structuring training the right way, making sure you have the right content, making sure you have the right facilitators. We cover the concept of pre and post assessments. I would argue that with the right technology that is both a dynamic agenda meeting application that is also giving you referenceable training, focal points of technology that we've developed and talked about that does that type of integrated work, you can ask an assessment that is assigned and pushed to the right user at the right time before they walk into a workshop, and then you can assess them after. Same type of delta. Same idea with polling that we talked about in the virtual classroom training. Leaderboards, you can generate points around that. So you're maybe giving an amplifier to data, and you can start to exacerbate where there may be gaps, or if you're giving people unlimited numbers of attempts at some type of question or quiz, that has multiple questions related to that live workshop, you'll start to see even more data. And similarly with role playing, and if we talk about, getting into a live workshop where you have very, very specific concepts and maybe you want to walk through, for example, something that has been troubling around the launch, maybe your company that has developed a particular therapy for the same disease state 3 or 4 times. You know that reimbursement has been a challenge in the past. So you're going to focus workshop time on reimbursement and role play scenarios on objection handling around reimbursement. So you can, with the right application, again, have people take the input through very, very simple mechanisms, a certification-like module that has the ability to toggle or select the behaviors and actions that are taking place and report that data back. And so yet again, you get to a place where you have 12 to 15 data points that you can walk through in a live classroom setting. Post-launch, I reference question of the day because certainly want to tip our hat to the fact that there are technologies making this more of a data-driven concept. But again, if we walk through it and think about the idea, attempts can tell you where challenges exist. Time spent looking at a question before someone responds to a question of the day. And for those of you that may not be as familiar with it, the concept is in a pull-through scenario, just like you would assign and deliver an e-learning module to a user for a home study scenario, question of the day concept or maybe even a knowledge check concept would be assigning out to you the need to answer a single question or a series of 3 to 5 questions. And looking at that data on the back end, again, the attempts, the time spent can tell us where there may be challenges. It gives us real opportunity to jump in and think about, what's working, what's not, what knowledge areas are gaps. So we've walked through just maybe highlighting different parts of these phases and thinking through how implementing the right technology, leveraging it the right way, deploying it with thoughtfulness can change certainly the context of how much data you're collecting from a single data point to 12 to 15. And with that data, again, if you start to now think about why you're using it, there's a ton of opportunity to impact training outcomes overall and in real time. So Dave, as we think about now having the right technologies and what we can measure, we should really talk about the audience because that's going to start to drive us to think about how we're structuring the use of that technology, correct?
Oh, it absolutely does. And hey, Tim, remind me next time not to go after Kent because he's really, really good. So I'm going to jump in and take your cue there, Kent, and talk a little bit about the stakeholders and, frankly, taking a lot of data and things, if you will, and making them training. And that's all about the people who are involved. And I think it's safe to say that any product launch, if you're in a big company or a small company, has a lot of eyeballs on it, a lot of stakeholders who have skin in the game. And this list here on the screen is not meant to be comprehensive, right? There's lots of people who have interest who may be a little further away from the learning journey. So we've got 4 groups here that we're going to talk a little bit about in the slides that follow and kind of what they might care about when it comes to collecting data in real time and what they might actually want to do with it. So we'll talk a little bit about the L&D department. Something tells me with this audience that'll be particularly relevant and what they care deeply about. We'll talk about leadership, and by leadership we could certainly mean sales leadership very much, but could also be thinking about brand leadership, operations leadership potentially. District managers, near and dear to my heart in terms of my background, but the folks on the ground leading the teams who are out there trying to be effective in launching a new product, since that's our case study. And then last but definitely not least, the sales representatives themselves, and how does data impact their world, or how can it if you're taking the time to collect it. And I kind of wish I had done this as a poll, because it would be very interesting to know in the audience today how many folks have actually not just been in one, but maybe all 4 of these roles at different parts of their career, so they can really put themselves in the shoes of these different stakeholders to understand what it would feel like to have a thirst for data and what they would ultimately do with it. So in the next few slides, we'll kind of look through some points of relevance and some things that might be similar between all 4 groups, as well as some things that might be different. So let's go ahead and move to the L&D department. Perfect. So if I were to do a comprehensive list of what the Learning and Development Department cares about, we would take the rest of our hour together to get through it. So we focused on just a few, and we're going to highlight one that sounds really simple, and that is training status. And what is the value in having real-time data available around training status? The reality is it isn't as simple as it sounds, because you've got potentially different sales audiences across multiple channels. You've got possibly non-sales audiences that you're responsible for training. You've got different bag structures. So frankly, the ability within a couple of clicks to have access to knowing if pre-work is complete before a training meeting is incredibly valuable, to knowing that when folks arrive in Las Vegas or wherever your launch meeting is, that they are prepared to do the work in application. And how do you get that data in real time to make good decisions? And that certainly ties into validating compliance. There may very well be a compliance component. Folks need to do that. How quickly can you get your hands on that data to provide remediation or involve management in getting things taken care of in advance of the launch meeting? A little more meaty would be, how do you gauge potential knowledge gaps? How do you use training status, knowing where people are in the journey, how long it took them to get to certain spots, to understand where gaps might be in such a way that you can on the fly make decisions, versus getting data on the back end where there's not an opportunity to do that. And then certainly, can you get to the point of understanding the efficacy of the information, the old did it work question, certainly on the mind of learning and development. How about leadership, though? Their list would be as long or longer, probably, than L&D in terms of what their interest was relative to data and having it in real time. And I think the most important one to call out here is job effectiveness. If I'm in leadership, I want to make sure people know how to do their job. I want them to know their role and launch the product effectively. So how can I get data as a leadership professional in such a way that I can collaborate with L&D to consider potential curricula changes? Can we talk about additional training programs that we might want to put into place? Again, not 3 months later, but as we go through the learning journey. How about that? And what kind of on-the-job support can I provide as a leadership team? And by that, that could mean training potentially, but it could also mean the allocation of resources. How about T&E budget? How about speaker program money? How about my local regional field trainer? How do I allocate their time appropriately based on data that I can collect in real time? And certainly driving coaching opportunities, right? How do we engage the district managers, who is the next group we want to talk about, in such a way that those coaching opportunities are leveraged? And I'll resist the temptation to spend too much time here based on this is where I spent the most of my career in the field. But as a manager, how can I get my hands on data that allows me to be very, very specific, leave guessing behind, and have data that allows me to pull the right coaching materials when I need it and how I need it? Really customize a role play scenario. If I'm sitting in Panera or Starbucks, do I know what I should be talking to my representative about? I can guess, but I'd love to do it with some data behind me that's gathered along the way in a learning journey. Can I personalize, and can I get the right mentors in front of my representatives? That's the benefit of having real-time data if I'm a district manager. And lastly, but certainly not least, because this is where we're all headed, is how do we get the representatives data in such a way that they can be impacted? And I think, to Ken's point earlier, we spend a lot of time talking about their access to completion status. I was very well aware, as a representative in the field, if I had completed a training or not, and if I was on the bad list or the good list. I knew that very quickly, but I didn't always have access to data that let me know how I was performing, or potentially data that could be suggestive of how I might perform in my job. So how do I compare to my peers in the region, maybe across the nation, people in my same vertical relative to product or area? Any leading indicators we might put together to show where we're headed with the launch journey. And certainly data that would allow me to have better time management. Time is everything in the field. Those precious minutes we get with providers, how can I use them most effectively based on data that we have available? So to get, there we go, a little lag. To get a little bit more specific, let's look now at that pre-launch process. And I'm going to go a little crazy here, and I'm going to work right to left on this slide versus left to right. And let's start in pre-launch with, what are stakeholders caring about when it comes to data? And let's just pick L&D. They're right at the top. It's probably fair to say that the biggest question on L&D's mind is, at the very basis of it all, what's working? I want to know what's working in the pre-launch process. So then I'm thinking about, what do I measure? Looking at that green box, I have a bunch of things I can do to measure, but as Kent referred to, one of the keys there is the ability to take a baseline assessment and measurement, certainly about knowledge and generated delta. Where are we coming in and where are we leaving in pre-launch? That's a great indicator of whether or not it's working relative to knowledge and comprehension. However, putting my L&D and my sales management hat on, what about other behaviors? Are there opportunities in the pre-launch process to get a gauge of other behaviors that I know are going to help people be successful in the field? How confident are representatives going through that pre-launch process? How engaged are they with the brand message? Are they bought in to this product that's going to hit the market and drive our company forward or not? And how do we affect and change those behaviors and get data back on that? That's what I want to know if it's working. And we've got a variety of places to do it. We have the learning modules. We have the brand campaigns. We have, as Kent alluded to really well, that virtual classroom and the chance as trainers to be brought up to speed in a way that we can influence that. So let's take a look at a journey here. Sorry for the delay again. But let's take a look at the pre-launch process. This probably looks very, very familiar to everybody. We've all been on this pre-launch journey before. And we've got modules. We've got some virtual classroom training built in there, and as well as some yellow stars that are indicative of places that we can be and maybe should be addressing assessment and collection of data with the right technology. And I go so far as to say that most people either are or intend to hit things up front with a assessment going into pre-launch and potentially need people test out at the end of pre-launch. But there's a lot of space in between over that X week period that you're in pre-launch to collect data. And Ken, I'll throw it to you for a couple of moments to talk about what those opportunities might be to maybe catch data and trends before you get to the end of the pre-launch process, so you can maybe affect change before you head on the airplane to Las Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And I think we've been talking a lot about the delta from a baseline assessment maybe through a broader phase that includes 5, 6, 8 touch points. But I referenced before, we spoke with a vendor, for example, who said we know historically that reimbursement codes and issues with the reimbursement process undermine our ability to deliver therapies in this particular area. We've also worked with customers where the competitive landscape has been a challenge. And when you have that insight, even if it's qualitative, that you know is preventing your learners from executing their job appropriately, take these stars here, for example, and put that measurement at a more granular level, so this all of a sudden can become a very, very strict diagnostic tool. If you know that this e-learning module and this virtual classroom training are both intended to focus on competitive landscape, don't reactively look at the data after the journey is over. Create maybe 3 different touch points before, in the middle, and after those particular events, and see what the deltas are, and focus very specifically on critical issues around competitive landscape. Don't make it a check the box. Look at it with the intention of remediating so that you could, if you needed to, add more training. And, you know, Dave, we should go out of our way to say, people are probably thinking, oh, we're adding more touch points, more questions. We're all concerned about survey fatigue. The opposite can absolutely happen. You may make an assumption that you need to overemphasize particular content areas. People can test out. You may take things out of your curriculum if you already know that there's an expertise that was underassumed. So that's the example I would give there in the pre-launch scenario.
I think it's a great one, Ken, and it actually kind of goes into our pull it all together example, and it's really just that, this idea of if you are that learning and development professional and you are able to take data points, not only the delta from, say, baseline to completion, but actually other touch points throughout the process, you're going to have an opportunity through the different vehicles you've deployed appropriately from a technology standpoint to make those kinds of decisions. So in the green box there, there's sort of an example that suggests possibly on the fly being able to know you need to add a virtual training on a given topic. You made the reference earlier to knowing all of a sudden that reimbursement is going to be a big issue. Maybe you uncover that through the learning journey and much earlier on can flex your approach to add that. But yeah, absolutely, if you can potentially take that same data and decide to take something out, my guess is there's nobody on the line or in your audience who's going to mind getting time back or potentially being able to vote that time to other important initiatives. So I think that's an important one. But if you're not collecting data in this way, you're not going to see the data until a point where it's probably too late to actually make a change that can improve outcomes, which to the point of the entire webinar, is the goal and where we're headed. So some good examples, I think, for pre-launch, but now we're going to pack our bags, we're going to get on the airplane, and we're getting ready to go to Las Vegas. I reference it all the time. I've been to many launch meetings there. My guess is if you're listening right now, you have too, but let's assume we're going to a launch meeting, and Tim, we're going to go ahead and launch this poll and get a sense from everyone in the audience about what opportunities you have to collect data in a launch meeting or live meeting setting. So some of the choices that select any that apply to your specific situation where you're doing your work now. Polls, certification practice, so what comes before the actual certification, the big did you pass or not event in certification. Any quizzing opportunities that might be there, and certainly just the baseline of attendance. So Ken, I'd be curious in your work with clients over the years, do any stand out here as being most often used or not?
I think in the context of what we're discussing, using technology, not many of these are as common. I think at the meeting, a lot of these fall off. People aren't necessarily delivering quizzes. They feel like it's extraneous. You may not be marking for attendance. Most commonly, I'd say the certification or even the certification practice are where we're seeing the most data generated. Not necessarily the right approach. I think you can tell we'd recommend more in these cases, but that's where I think I've seen the most collected in the last few years.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and certainly my experience has been heavy in certification, less in certification practice, which is interesting because I think there could be an opportunity there to collect more data in the practice point, so there is some kind of spacing between collecting the practice data to then being able to actually do some more pointed coaching before the actual certification. So I think that's an interesting one to talk a little bit more about. And yeah, my experience personally with some of the other elements has been less so than the more formal certification and testing and so on. So Tim, I don't know how we're looking on responses, but I'd be curious to see. I'm sweating again. I want to see if my answers play out or not.
Well, thanks, Dave. Everybody, I'm going to let you just wrap up your votes here in the next couple of seconds, and then I'll go ahead and share the results. We have quite a few in, so let me go ahead and close that off at this point. I see more coming in. I'm going to give you just another couple of seconds here.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, thanks so much. Appreciate you all sharing with us, and I think your comments, by the way, guys, were right on. Here you go.
All right, good.
Tim, I don't want to brag, but I am on fire a little bit with my items there. Right. Exactly. So yeah, certification very heavy. I think somewhat expected. Attendance kind of right behind there. Kind of cool to see polls up there as high as it is. That means that there's folks out there leveraging some of the technology that's available to actually poll the audience in different ways, whether it's traditional ARS or through the different apps that are available to actually pull that technology together. So awesome. And I think you'll see in what we're about to talk through that these can be applied and be very rich sources of data throughout that live meeting so that continued decisions can be made to actually impact the outcome of training. So thank you, Tim. Cool beans. And the next time we have a poll, I want everybody to take your thumb and your pointer finger and put it right on your chin like that guy and look up to the left, because that'll make sure we get the most accurate answers out of everybody. So just please do that if you're following along at home.
Dave, I've been delivering the entire webinar like that, just so you know.
That completely makes sense to me. All right, so I went one slide too far, so let me come back here and let's talk about the launch meeting now. And let's take the same approach. Let's start on the right-hand side of this slide. We are in Las Vegas. We are all together. Probably all of these stakeholders are present at the meeting in one form or another, and they've got a lot of things on their mind when it comes to information that we might be able to measure or collect. And selfishly, because we're the ones running the show today, Ken, I'm going right to DM. I can't help myself. And as a manager at the launch meeting, I want to know, are my reps ready for certification? Are there specific reps that need help? And frankly, even more important and certain to me, if I may, is are these folks ready to go in the field and execute on the brand story, the brand message, and to sell the product effectively? So that's what's on my mind as a stakeholder when I'm at the launch meeting. So to the questions and points earlier, what do we measure then to get that information to me as a stakeholder in that case? Knowledge comprehension jumps out. I certainly want to know about how folks are comprehending to then turn that into a certifiable message for sure and an executable message in front of healthcare providers. Same thing for some of the behaviors we've touched on, which ClearPoint talks a lot about in work we do as far as representative confidence and engagement. And I think what we're really looking for in this case, Ken, is gaps. So what are the gaps that exist from what we're seeing and what we're measuring and where we ultimately want people to be? And can we get that information before day 3, you know, when everyone's ready to pack their stuff up and get on the plane to go home? Can we get some of that information about gaps before people leave so we can, on the fly, make adjustments, make changes as a sales leader or otherwise to impact change and make things happen going forward? So those are opportunities to measure, and Kent, you did a nice job walking through a number of those areas before in the launch process. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love, Kent, to get your thoughts, like you did on the pre-launch journey, where some of those in-between, air quotes, opportunities exist in a very typical 3-day launch meeting, as you see described here, might be to collect some of that data to analyze where there could be some gaps we could address.
Sure, that's right. And Dave, you and I have talked about this. In your experience as a DM, you said so many times you were just guessing based on your experience working with particular individuals that they probably were having challenges in certain areas that they had before. That's not data. It's certainly not qualitative, and it's not giving you real-time opportunities to dive in where there are known gaps. And if we look at this launch, these are, for example, a 3-day meeting, and the structure, again, looks very similar to things that you may be doing. But let's earmark a couple of these icons where we've added gaming elements, and you can see in workshops, and there's certainly activities there. But why would you be adding games, right? This is a hot topic, and sometimes people equate games to measurement because games generate a lot of data, often leaderboard data, but it can be mutually exclusive. Yet the data is usable. You're going to be structuring games to get people engaged, and most often engaged around topics that you think are going to be challenging or problem areas. Don't overlook that data. Don't just look at leaderboards collectively for the purpose of competition. Yes, intrinsic competition is great, keeps people going, but if you have the ability, get those DMs, the data around the activities that lead to leaderboard points. What are their groups actually doing? Where are the challenges? How much time are they spending? Because guess what? That's the activity, Dave, that, as you referenced, is going to give you a chance. Maybe right here after day 1, maybe that trainer huddle occurs. You're seeing some things that are consistent between these 2 gamified activities. Same after day 2. You can use your time in the morning, breakfast, when you have breakouts or breaks, to get with your particular reps, understand what's going on, and make sure they have the best opportunity to succeed here on day 3 with that certification. So don't overlook that gaming data, because it's probably being structured with learning objectives in mind that can give you rich information about where you're having challenges or, frankly, strengths.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And again, as a manager here, as we go to the next slide to wrap up the launch conversation, it's all about what can I do with that data before I leave the meeting to help my representatives be successful. So that could be grabbing a regional trainer at the meeting before that certification to give them proper remediation. It could be my time as a manager spent doing some of that remediation, with the goal ultimately, to get back on that soapbox again, to not only just get a good grade on a certification, because I do think that happens when we're talking about quote-unquote assessments or certifications. It becomes about the certification, which is certainly important, and it is a measurement or frankly a compliance item that it needs to be done, but I'm wanting that to then translate into field-based behavior. And if I can do some of that work at the meeting before we're in the field, I want to make that happen. So let's go to our last section here as we hit the home stretch in the webinar overall and talk about that post-launch process, all the rage, whether you call it post-launch or pull-through or whatever the case might be. Starting on the right, a lot of things on people's mind from a stakeholder perspective. Let's zero in on sales leadership, who frankly at this point wants to make sure that their field-based folks are prepared for anything that could happen. Because post-launch, you start learning what you didn't know and you see things you didn't expect. How prepared are people to handle what the market is going to throw them? Some measurement opportunities there, certainly knowledge and behaviors. We keep coming back to those too, but now the ideas of retention, how much has been retained from what we did at the meeting, as well as how are those concepts being applied, come very much into play. And there are a number of ways that we're attacking post-launch efforts now. Certainly won't go through all of these, but the quizzes are there. Kent, you mentioned the daily questions of the day. Micro-learning is a big concept now. These sort of pulsed, very short learning opportunities are very much sort of in vogue right now. And I'll just point out that they're all very important. They all actually offer very rich opportunities to collect data. But the spotlight, in my opinion, at this stage still comes down to the idea of measuring that retention and that application that you want so that appropriate coaching can be done. The folks have now left the safe confines of the training environment. They're in the field. And as much as these opportunities present data-rich situations, how can that ultimately then translate into coaching opportunities? And before we kind of wrap this section, Ken, I'd be curious if you do have any commentary on these actual elements or how they might relate to that important concept of coaching.
I think the biggest comment for me, Dave, and we see this every day, is post-launch or pull-through activities are often the first to fall by the wayside when there are time constraints or budget constraints. We obviously recommend people keep them in, but I think if we add another layer to that recommendation, it would be, I would keep items in where you can critically measure and do fewer plus measurement than to try to fight to keep lots of activities in without measurement. The second point is absolutely make sure that you are thoughtful enough to refine the objectives of this part of the journey based on what you learn in the first two. We often, and we all do this. You build a curriculum, you stick with it, you deliver it. But when you're harvesting rich data from home study or pre-launch and the launch event, and you're learning where there are challenges that may end up being gaps and people can't retain information, adjust and measure.
It's a great point, and I'll kind of reiterate your point about less is more in pull-through. I think it's easy to want to either dump it all together or throw the kitchen sink at it. And I think the idea of less is more, focus very specifically on a key initiative, and harvest the data and make appropriate adjustments. Just speaking from an end user, the more that's being thrown at me that I don't have enough hands to catch, the more likely it is that I'm not going to pay attention to it anyway. So that whole idea that you're going to coach, change behavior, and actually impact incomes, there's very much a point of diminishing returns there. So I think that's a really good point. And at this point, we'll kind of wrap up this section talking about those sales leaders. There's lots of ways that sales leadership across different functions in an organization can take that rich data and do some of that flexing, Kent, that you mentioned. It could, again, be very training focused, or there could be competitions enacted. There could be ways, as long as you have that data and you have access to it from the appropriate technology, that you can make those changes on the fly and not abandon things, but make those changes that can impact change. So with that said, everyone get your thumb and finger ready to get on the chin here. Tim, we've got, I think, our final survey of the day before Kent takes it home, and we get to some questions hopefully at the end. But would love everybody to chime in on what stakeholders in your organization, so definitely think about your specific organizations, do you think or should have access to data at all stages of training? So we're talking pre-launch, launch meeting, and pull-through slash post-launch opportunity. Who should have access to all of that data across the board? We've got the sales reps, district managers, the executive team, sales training, sales ops. Go ahead and jump in there. And again, Kent, you've been at this a long time in different capacities. Any jump out to you when you take a look at that list?
I think you and I talked about this leading up to the webinar. We were debating whether or not to make it a select one and pick the most important, but depending on if you guys are viewing this in a room, that certainly isn't the best position to put people in. I think for the most part, in real time, if we think about real time and the topics that we've been considering, for me the two that are the most critical for the breadth of areas we're talking about measuring are the district managers and sales training. I think they're going to have the most vested interest in all of the different components that we have been discussing today. I think everyone needs to have visibility on some level. I think the areas where people shouldn't have visibility would be interesting to hear from our audience as well, and maybe we'll retain that for another day.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say sales training and district managers, because we could have a whole separate webinar on that interplay between sales training and then ultimately the execution post training initiative by the district management team, and I've been on both sides of that conversation before, and there's a very understandable, I think friction, may or may not be the appropriate word to use there, but I think the idea that they could potentially both have the same access to information and data could potentially be a unifying point for both of those sides there. But I've been pretty good on surveys. We'll see if Tim lights up the poll in such a way that we could be on the right track. How are we looking, Tim?
We're looking great, folks. I'm going to ask you to wrap up your choices here in just a moment, and I'll show the results to Dave and Kent and the rest of you. As a reminder, once we get out of this poll, we're coming close to the end of the program. If you have any questions, it would be a great time to send them on in, get them ready for Q&A. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and close off the polling, and let's see how right Dave and Kent were with the fingers on the chin. They were right.
Very nice. Look at that.
Hey, look at that. Absolutely. Not a surprise. Sales training almost caps out at 100% there, and managers not far behind. So, yeah, very consistent today. And I'm going to hang it up today. I'm 100% across the board. I'm retiring.
Wait, that's not fair. No. No, appreciate.
Take it away. Why don't you take us home and wrap this thing up?
I think your experience really has such a great element because it grounds this in practical application. And I think this is just a summative type chart and a visualization, again, something that we've developed in the past around a launch journey. And you can see where the colors represent the phases and the circles with the numbers are really representing areas where we're delivering, for example, e-learning or ebooks or virtual classroom training. And in between, you see that the recommendation we're really making is measure often, maybe measure small, don't create survey fatigue, and measure specifically. So it's around knowledge, it's around behaviors that you expect to come from a knowledge, I guess, acquisition, activity. Make sure that it's a significant part of the plan and do it with the concepts in mind that we referenced. Know the technologies, understand the data that you can collect with them, your access to that data, the stakeholders who need to see that data and why. And if you can think through layering a meaningful measurement strategy on top of anything that you're doing right now, it will give you a very real, very practical opportunity to impact training outcomes day to day in real time. And we see this as being truly transformative. So to leave you with some key takeaways before we jump into questions, I really touched on them just a minute ago, but if we go beyond and into that second bullet point, if you're measuring at intervals that match critical initiative milestones, that can really be defined differently, and we talked about some of those different approaches throughout the presentation. I'd underscore again, it might be phase to phase. It really could be at a specific knowledge level, though, and this is something we're seeing increasingly. Organizations know, even if they don't currently have the data to show, they know where their pain points have been in the past. Training and training around sort of redelivering that knowledge are great opportunities to test that, collect data, improve value with what you're doing through training initiatives. We talk about leveraging technologies that make data review easy and in real time. Understand if that's part of what you're trying to accomplish, going through, for example, that launch continuum that we referenced and in the meeting. Do you want to look at data after day one so that you can change the approach to day two? If so, technologies that you're purchasing and the way you're using them have to make sure that they're giving you access to that data in real time. And so yes, we're going to say measure as much as possible. Of course, do it thoughtfully. I wouldn't recommend ever giving 25-question quizzes every week. You'll have people banging down your door saying they want your head, but you know, 1 or 2 questions every week can provide constant touch points and constant insight that really revolutionizes the way you use data and technology to have better training outcomes. So with that, I want to move on to questions. Tim, we'll tell the audience just a little bit about ClearPoint. We are a 15-year-old business exclusively focused on delivering training solutions to the life sciences industry. We are a global entity, and we have absolutely had lots of success working through these types of concepts with our customers. Being a strategic partner, not just in building content and figuring out the best way to deliver it, but how to measure it, is an increasing part of our business, and certainly we'd be excited to talk to you about it. So if you have any questions about our capabilities in that area, please feel free to reach out. I'll leave our contact information on this slide as we send it to you, Tim, and see if there are any questions that we can end by answering.
Well, thanks, Kent and Dave. Great presentation. We do have some questions queued up. Folks, if you have any additional questions, now is a great time to send them on in as well. And then while you're typing away, I'm also going to point out what Kent just alluded to, and Dave. We do have their contact information shared here as well, so certainly you can feel free to reach out to them, but it'd be great to address some questions here as well. Let me start with this question from Carrie. This came in earlier, and Kara, I'm sorry, and I've been holding it. We talked in one of the first polls about coaching apps. Can you give us an example of a coaching app?
Sure, I can. There's certainly coaching capabilities in applications out there, mobile applications. Talent First has an application on the market. There's an application that we've seen called Connect Hub, any number in between. I think it's safe to say you can use other applications that have a combination of sort of form-based input and assignments to replicate coaching if needed. I think a big key, though, is can you run through real-time scenarios, so have documents that for your learners explain what they need to be doing, and then the ability to take inputs either around actions, activities, and that can be very specifically based on a rubric, but also have free-form text. So there's a couple that we've seen, a couple other ways to do it. Dave, I'm sure you've seen some as well.
I definitely have. I know Proficient Learning has a great one that I've seen that has a really good visual interface and can do a lot of the things that I think we referenced. And I also wouldn't walk away from whatever folks are using to do coaching. So it may not be an app, but most people do use some kind of technology to capture field coaching information, which I know Proficient does that. But if you don't have it in an app form, there's probably rich opportunities in just the coaching process within whatever platform you use to capture coaching as you get more specific and use data to get people back into the LMS potentially to relook at a module or send them to other places that your content lives. There are opportunities, if you're leveraging technology the right way, to pull that data back and use it as well. So I think that's one app that I've seen that does a good job of sort of doing that. But then to your point, there are other ways within even just whatever existing technology you have to have data in mind. And I think that's a lot of times the key. You just have to go into whatever you're using with the idea that I want data back from this, and there's ways to leverage that. So that'll be my addition.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, look at the special offer. Focal Point is our mobile training delivery application. You can absolutely leverage some of our features for coaching purposes. We at ClearPoint take pride in being strategic partners. We want to talk about what we see out in the industry, but there are a lot of things that Focal Point can do for you, including training delivery, event management, and there are absolutely some coaching capabilities that can be harnessed there as well. So check out the link and be entered to win a GoPro Hero 4. So.
Great. Yeah, folks, if you didn't happen to notice, we've sent out a link to the special offer here for a demo of Focal Point through the chat window, so you can just make a one-click to get right to that demo as well, and maybe win a GoPro Hero 4. Kent and Dave, a question from Carrie is, if data is being collected at live meetings, whether through certifications or quizzes, how is it being used real-time, or is it not being used real-time?
I'll start on this one, Dave. I think, unfortunately, the answer is more often than not, it's probably not being used real-time. I think it's often being collected, looked at real-time, most often, again, to post points to things like leaderboards, sometimes to gather insight. Increasingly, the recommendations we're making, the aspiration that we're seeing our customers have is to look at very specific data so that there can be curriculum modifications made or agenda modifications made to a particular meeting situation. So maybe looking at pre-work associated with a particular workshop, and then maybe an assessment, a very short assessment coming out of that workshop, including polling data, can give you a sense if your key 3 learning objectives have been met, and or if there are knowledge gaps. Maybe you left a particular hour time slot in day 2, so you could backfill and add more content around things that you know are challenges. So those are, I think, what the trends we're seeing people move towards. Obviously, again, having the right technology to look at that data in real time is sometimes a limitation.
And I would add to that, I mean, my first place to go with that is you've got to have a technology that actually provides the data in a way that is quickly accessible. The folks that have that, I think, are the ones who are actually demonstrating that agility to make those changes and so on, and they can structure their meetings accordingly. When things are so disparate across multiple systems or hard to get, then yeah, it becomes completely impractical. It's not possible. So I think that is a key. And frankly, the institution of some of these trainer huddles, which is not revolutionary by any means, but it does provide that very formal opportunity in these meetings at the end of a day and in the beginning, if you've got the right technology and you have the data, to very formally get into it and have that be a guiding post for that day or for the next day. So 2 additions there.
We have just a couple of more questions, folks. We are at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to go a little bit over, but these are great questions, and I really want to get to them. If for some reason you have to leave for your next meeting, we're going to send you a note in about 1 hour connecting it to the recording, and you can always check back on whatever you might have missed there. Let me ask a question from Dane. This is a great question. Is there any point along the training continuum that you feel is most critical for gaining data input from reps?
Really good one. Ken, do you want to take a stab at that first? Because then I can give my general color on that.
Yeah, is all of it not the right answer, Tim?
No.
I mean, I guess if I were, the question, just to make sure I'm following, is to choose sort of one point, right? If I had to double down and choose one point in the journey. I think what I would say is, maybe the 2 weeks as you've sort of completed the home study phase prior to moving into a launch event. I think there is still opportunity to individually change the training journey, get in, remediate, do some coaching, but you can't wait till the day before. You certainly can't wait till you're at an event. So to me, there's a key window there where if the whole intention and takeaway from this presentation is I can use technology and data to sort of personalize or make changes at a global level to what we're trying to teach based on what we know are some challenges. To me, that's a critical place. And it may not be as much that you're measuring there, but ideally you're sort of aggregating if you haven't had a chance yet and looking at the measurement data that you've taken and using that window of time to really go at some of the problems you have.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'll take a stand of sorts here. I don't like anything less than wasting time at a live meeting on things that maybe aren't as relevant or aren't appropriate or aren't, sort of in line with where people are. So I vote very much for that pre-launch period, whether there's a specific point in time in that pre-launch process. I think there's lots of points like we talked about today to do it, but I think the more you can be focused on measurement in that pre-launch process, you then have an opportunity to be very nimble and make adjustments so that live launch meeting can be as impactful as possible. Because I've been to my share of meetings that didn't feel very well aligned to where people were coming in, and that's tough to get through, and that can create all other kinds of problems. So I say if you had to pick and you can't answer all of the above, that pre-launch period is huge.
Well, thank you very much. We have one last question, folks. Let me throw this one out there. This is a question from David. Kent and Dave, you mentioned behavioral assessment during home study as well as knowledge assessment. Can you give us an example of a behavioral assessment?
Kent, I'll try to hold you back on that one. Why don't you attack that one and I'll add color. I know you want to go with that one.
Yeah, this is something we talked about again in the space and our approach to measurement. ClearPoint in particular, we've taken a stance that the big issue with training data is that there isn't enough, and we've recommended moving beyond just completions. We reference that here. I think we could certainly, if you'd like to chat more about some of the things we're doing with behavioral assessments, we'd love to set up some time. But just to be more broad, for example, and use a bigger industry example, the concept of engagement, we're certainly applying it to learners and thinking about how learners are engaged with the brand story. But the concept of engagement at a corporate level is also something that Gallup, with its Q12 poll, has been deploying successfully throughout organizations for quite some time. And so behaviors can be defined a few different ways. Engagement is an example of, at a corporate level, defined one way by Gallup. At a learner in the sales training space, defined a different way by us. But measuring, how people are, behaving in that regard. Are they engaged with the brand story? Are they engaged around the, sort of patient journey and things of that nature? So those are some of the concepts. Easier to talk a little bit more in depth about that, but that's the reference that we're making there.
Absolutely. And we've developed as a company some proprietary and very specific survey instruments and tools as part of our Viewpoint product that actually get at different ways to collect that data and make it very tangible. that I think, as somebody having been in the industry and coached my share of teams, to have access to that level of data in addition to knowledge presents a whole new game, if you will, for ways to coach and make changes on the fly. So yeah, it's definitely a broader conversation, but something that's very tangible and feasible to do.
Excellent. Well, guys, that does bring us to the end of today's presentation. Let me thank you both for a great job on this, Dave and Kent. Nice presentations, and hope you enjoyed it as well.
Very much. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everybody, for jumping on and joining.
Excellent. And also, I want to thank everybody for joining along as well, and certainly to the folks who joined us through Twitter, too, and might have shared some thoughts through Twitter. We appreciate that. And speaking of Twitter, let me tell you a little bit about this. Here at LTEN, we believe that training is the heart of the organization. When trainers do their jobs, lives are improved and lives are saved. The ROI of the company is improved when the company is ready and armed with a wealth of skills and information. So we're going to ask you to help us spread this message that training is the heart of the organization by joining us on Thunderclap, which is a social media sharing platform. You'll be able to connect with your Twitter or Facebook to share this message. So if you can visit the URL here on the screen, you call it LTENconference.com. Training is the heart of the organization, with a little dash in between all of that. To learn more about Thunderclap and how you can get involved and maybe help tweet out this important message that training is the heart of the organization. So certainly look for that. You can also find more information about this on the LTEN conference website as well. And speaking of that conference, we're taking place, June 13th to 16th, just a couple of weeks away here at the Gaylord National. Hope to see everybody there. ClearPoint's going to be there. I hope to see you guys there as well. If you are interested in joining us and haven't already signed up, it is definitely not too late. You can visit LTENconference.com to find out more information on that. And also, I would urge you to join us for our upcoming webinars. In fact, our next webinar is going to be wrapping up the conference. On June 28th, we'll be back here with a webinar sharing some of the presentations and solutions learned at the 45th LTEN Annual Conference. And then we have some other upcoming programs on Friday, July 8th on Women in Leadership. There's a gap for that. You'll definitely want to join that program. And I see I have the wrong date here, and I do apologize for that. But this is our September 9th program, Creating a Dynamic Employee Experience, the new model for talent management. We'll be telling you more about that as September draws clearer, and there'll be more programs filling in between now and then as well. But certainly would urge you always to visit l-10.org/webinars to register and find out about any upcoming webinars. For those who have asked, today's program is going to be archived at this address, l-10.org/webinar archives, and we're going to send you an email in less than an hour now connecting you to a recording of today's program as well. Finally, my email address is showing here at the bottom of the screen. If I can help with anything, just let me know. Again, before, during, or after our webinars. I'm always here and happy to help however I can. With all that said, I'm going to thank our speakers again, Kent Malmros and Dave Noonan. I'm going to thank our sponsor, ClearPoint Learning, and mostly I'm going to thank all of you for your time, attention, participation throughout today's program. We do look forward to seeing you back here for our next webinar. We look forward to seeing you in National Harbor for the conference, and let me wish you all a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.